If you can't hear me, be sure to gesture or yell or something so I can make sure to try to speak louder. Obviously, it's not going to really help if you can't actually hear what I'm saying. Well, good morning, everybody. Hope you're not too hungover. My name is Phoenix Snoke, and the talk that I'm doing today is called Don't Panic. It's a beginner's guide to hardware hacking. The way I tried to set this up is that if you have very little to no experience, you should be able to follow the instructions I'm providing and get a result. As a result of that, I made it very slide heavy, so there are going to be written parts there. If you'd like a copy of the slides, I'm going to include my contact info at the beginning and end of this talk so that you can get them. No pressure, Rob. And anyhow, I'm apparently supposed to give a bio or talk about myself so that you know who I am, which seems a little narcissistic, but I've spoken here twice previously with my lovely and talented wife. This is the first time that I've spoken by myself, so, be gentle. Anyhow, we've also spoken at DerbyCon, SkyDogCon, and a few B-sides up and down the countryside. I've got a 2-year-old, and I make questionable life choices. Other than that, I'm very, very normal. I'm going to include my email on here. I don't really do social media, so that's just the easiest way to get a hold of me. If you have any questions or comments, or want a copy of the slides or anything, feel free to send them to me. Again, since I have a 2-year-old, I don't always have as much free time as I would like to think I do. But I do make a point of checking things, and if I'll make a point of getting back to you. So here we go. Pop quiz. Based on stock photos, what is the appropriate way to hold a soldering iron safely? Yes, if this is any sort of indication, you should never take any sort of safety guidance based on stock photos. I was kind of surprised I couldn't find one of somebody picking their nose with one. But yeah, their safety stuff is apparently not a consideration in fake photography. That is what it is. There's my contact information. It's phoenix@insecuredevices.com. And so about how this talk is organized. First part's going to be why you should think this is interesting. I'm going to spoiler it so you don't leave the room. Hardware vulnerabilities are really, really cool. The other thing about it is that there aren't a lot of ways to really mitigate against them in the first place. However, if a device goes out with hardware vulnerabilities, that vulnerability will be there for the lifetime of the device. They aren't going to send a technician to your house with a pair of scissors to cut off a UART port or something like that. It's there. Additionally, we're going to talk about UART, which is going to be a majority of this talk since it's geared towards beginner level. We're going to talk about JTAG. I'm going to try to briefly touch upon SPI and I2C if we have time. Both of them are really outside the scope of this. SPI is really, really cool, but it's not really anything I would consider a basic or beginner level techniques. And I2C really doesn't have a lot of InfoSec-specific uses, although it's really cool too, but it's more like if you're trying to make your own devices to do things. And I do have a video demonstration of actually breaching a device that I'm going to show here. I apologize in advance. I had to do it into two parts because I'm not very good about editing videos, which is not what I'm talking about, so I hope that's all right. So here's UART. This device was a baby monitor that we used for IoT testing years ago. Reason I included it is because it's a nice, large, beautiful picture, and because the helpful factory in China silk screened the port, which made it very easy to locate. Additionally, there are some visual indicators to tell me kind of which pin is which. I've got a better picture that I'm going to use in a little bit there, but we're going to just tell you what they are and how we mess with this. First thing about UART is it's not a protocol. Some people will confuse it as one. A lot of people will call them either RS-232s or RS-422s. 232s are your old serial ports that I'm sure you're all familiar with. They're not really wrong per se, but they're not really right either. A UART is simply a physical circuit. It's only there to get information from point A to point B. There can be it, but like in terms of the people calling them that, it would be like calling any sort of copper cabling a Comcast modem. There is a copper wire component of it. However, that is not the device in and of itself. There's going to be 3 to 6 pins. Usually, we're going to only need 3. The rest of it we can ignore. Now, on these, security is not any sort of consideration, and this is the part where we're all supposed to act surprised. But if you look at any sort of industry writings about this, about securing them, they'll actually be talking about securing it so that they make sure the signal goes from point A to point B. So you actually, if you look at any industry stuff about securing it, they're talking about changing baud rates or turning parity on or off. There's nothing about actually securing the signal. It's just from getting it where it's supposed to go. The other thing about this that I would really like to emphasize is that when you locate the power or VCC, pretend it is a dangerous snake, and you know how they'll say that you should be, it's as afraid of you as you are of it. No, you should be more afraid of this. I don't want you to break anything or, shock yourself and send me hate mail. So the part we care about is how do we break it? What we're going to want to do is we're going to want to connect these pins to a device that has a USB to TTL cable. There are a variety of flavors of these. I would recommend against getting a PL2303. The company itself, please don't sue me. They seem like they do a fine enough job, but there are a lot of counterfeit versions of this device on the market. And so you could buy one and it just wouldn't work out of the box. For something that you're just starting out on, you wouldn't necessarily know the tool wasn't working. Additionally, in order to try to make this accessible, I was trying to come up with the lowest cost way to do everything. And telling you to buy something that doesn't work really kind of goes against that purpose. The one I would recommend is some flavor of FTDI. That's the name of the company. It's Future Technologies something. But they have a series of these. They're 23 2 blanks. There's going to have like a R, a Q, and S. They have 6-wire and 4-wire versions. The 6-wire versions can do a few more things if you start getting into Arduinos. The price of them are about the same as the 4-wire version, so I would just recommend getting that since you can do more things with the tool and it's about the same price. Additionally, there's going to be a dip switch on them. A lot of them will have a dip switch setting to change it from 3.3 or 5 volts. You're going to make sure you have it on the correct voltage. A lot of logic is almost always going to be on 3.3. You can, in theory, build your own with an Arduino. Most Arduinos are set at 5 volts, though, so you might have to do some sort of level shifting. Anyway, a lot of this is trivial. If you have access to an oscilloscope or a logic probe, you really don't need to do any of this. However, if you can read an oscilloscope already, you probably already know everything I'm going to say in this talk because you know how to do hardware work. Additionally, you're just going to use a multimeter. That's what I use to detect probes on these. If you're going to do JTAG enumeration, obviously it gets a little more advanced, but we're just messing with UARTs right now. Can you all hear me okay? I feel like I'm... All right, awesome. Now, there are visual indicators that you can use to help narrow down where you're looking. Grounds will sometimes show if you shine a bright light under them. I'll show you in the next picture, but there'll usually be a pad that'll basically be a cross on it. You can look for like a large chunk of solder or a metal pad that they'll actually have under it. Additionally, the traces, the lines that go out from the ports, the wide ones are going to be your power. The thinner ones are usually going to be your transmit and receive. I have a beautiful example here. This is actually the device I used for the video demo. Off to the left there, those are the JTAG pins. But the ones that we're concerned about are on the right there. I can tell you from looking at them which ones are which. The two with the thin lines there off to the right, those are your transmit and receives. The one with the pad is going to be your power. Here, I'm going to just stand in front of this. Sorry, I don't have a laser pointer or anything. That's going to be your power. There's the cross pattern I was talking about. That's your ground. There's your transmit and receive. Visually, you aren't going to be able to tell your transmit and receives apart, but that's not that big a deal in the scheme of things. We have other ways to do that. So, in order to find the UART port or to verify that you have found it successfully, you want to take your multimeter and you want to change it to your continuity setting. Continuity is going to be one of those two symbols. What will happen is when you successfully make continuity, the device will beep. If you want to know what I'm talking about, you can take the probes and touch them together. It's the same thing. This does not work if the device is powered on at all. So what you're going to want to do, it doesn't matter what order you use the probes on, you're going to touch the ground and then touch it to another grounded point. If there's an antenna on the device, they usually attach a ground to that, but there's going to be like a large piece of solder usually or a pad of some sort. Again, when you hear the beep, you've won. Now, in terms of the power, when you start the device up and probe the pin, it's going to go to 3, 5 volts, whatever the power setting is, and it's going to stay there. Once you've identified it, again, remember the white traces if you're looking for it. But once you've identified it, just ignore it. We don't need it for anything we're going to do, and it is one of the few things that can damage your equipment. So that's why I'm trying to, stress that this is something we just don't want to mess with. So for finding the transmit, during the boot sequence is the easiest way to do that. What you'll do is you'll probe the pin. It should start around the same level as the device itself, but it'll drop off a little bit, and it'll remain very active. It's going to go up and down a lot. You can look for the thin traces to try to narrow down where you're looking. For the receive, in a lot of cases, we can just simply say, that's the one that, we've narrowed it, we've found all the others, that's the one that's left over, congratulations. Again, you can look for that thin trace if you're trying to visually, narrow down where to search for. Usually, though, it'll start at about the same voltage as the device itself, but then it'll drop dramatically. There are exceptions to this. If you have a device like a router or something like that that is constantly trying to receive, it is going to be very, very hard to tell your receive and your transmit apart because they're both very active and they're both high level. The good thing, though, is that you can guess. You can hook it up to your USB to TTL. You can run everything. You'll usually get a result. It'll be a bunch of garbage. It's going to be just random ASCII characters. You can swap it out at that point, then it works correctly. But it's not going to harm anything. If you plug them in backwards, it's not going to harm anything. The one thing we really want to remember is that, your transmit on your device is your talk, your receive is your listening. You have a transmit and receive on your computer that you're attaching this to. You want to make sure to reverse the lines. You don't want to attach talk to talk and listen to listen. They won't be able to communicate correctly. Now, there are some other UART pins. There's a CTS DTR. They don't factor into anything that we're going to do, so we don't really care about them. Additionally, they're going to, depending on how sensitive your multimeter is, they're going to probably read fairly close to 0 most of the time anyway. So, I mean, they'll stand out as being weird simply because there'll be a lack of activity on them and they won't set off any sort of continuity. But in general, most of the things I find are either going to have 3 or 4 pins. 3 will be the bare minimum, since obviously we need a transmit, a receive, and a ground. But sometimes the power one's there too. So, when you want to use a terminal program, I use Minicom all the time because that's just what I'm used to working with. You can use Screen or other ones. It doesn't really matter. You're going to want to set a baud. 11/520 is usually a good first guess. Most devices in the last several years are set for that. So, I mean, it's extremely common. So it's not a bad guess because you're going to be right more often than not. Additionally, you can write scripts. If you do anything with like PySerial or anything like that, you can write scripts to go through and check at each level so that you can see that you're actually getting good information. If you're wrong, a lot of times it's just going to be random strings of ASCII characters, whereas once you actually set it correctly, you'll start seeing, press enter, you'll get text that's human readable. Again, remember that we want to put those wires in the correct place, so we're going to want to swap, transmit to receive and vice versa. Now, for troubleshooting, oh my goodness, that's too small to really see, sorry. If you get a lot of output that it's going to be like a diamond symbol with a inverse question mark on it, a lot of times that indicates that the ground is not grounded, that you've soldered there. So I would double check that. You can check the pin, the end of the pin that you've soldered, and check that for continuity. It still works. Again, you would want to make sure the device was powered off. Same thing with your transmits and your receives. If you solder something, sometimes the pins are already attached, but you usually are going to have to attach them yourself. But if you want to make sure the pins are done correctly, you can test the end of the pin. That works just like the port itself. But I would check that. I would check your transmit and receive. Swap them out. See if that works. Then you can check your baud rate. Very, very rarely I've seen, again, specifically with the question mark error, some devices will want you to enable hardware flow control. Which I made a note of that because it's not really that common, and if you don't mess around with a lot of this, you wouldn't necessarily be able to figure it out. I don't want to frustrate people. So I'm going to show my demo video here again. I apologize for it. You should stop. I apologize for it being a little badly done, but again, I don't really do videos. I'm not John Waters. But this is me attaching the device itself. Ow. I went ahead and I actually attached the pins because I filmed it and it just ended up being about 2 minutes of the back of my hand. I figured nobody wanted to see that. So there's our pins that we've set. I'm testing them with the multimeter. You'll hear it beep here in a second. As you can tell, I've set it for continuity there. I'm checking the other ones for continuity just for the sake of completeness on this. Spoiler alert, they don't beep because they're not the ground. Anyhow, I'm then going to plug in the device and show how I'm trying to find the transmit and receive. The problem with this, it's a router, so it's constantly trying to receive information, so I did end up having to guess for the transmit and receive on it. I happened to guess right on this. I was just going off the one that went lowest. But yes, you check the ground to the active cables when the device is powered. I had no idea that wouldn't actually stop there. Sorry, guys. See? 3.1. The device itself runs at 3.3, so. But you got your boot sequence where it's going up and down from where it's transmitting information. And that's how we verified that you've done that correctly. You can just put pins on there. I usually like to run wires to it because it just makes it easier. Now, the other video I have of this, it's a screen from inside Cali. This is on the other end. Once I did that, I attached those wires to a USB to TTL cable. And this is how, the terminal will work on the other end. Because I think you'll find this really interesting. Oh. That's as... Oh, fudge. That's, I think, about as big as I can make it. If you really want to see this, I can send you a copy of it. Just shoot me an email. But basically, this is me going into Minicom, then plugging the device in so that it powers up. At this point, it's going to start going through the boot sequence. We have human-readable information here. Or it would be human-readable if it was large enough for you to actually see it. I'm sorry. But we're going to let it do its thing here. Sometimes you want to interrupt them, but for the first time, I would just let it run all the way through. You might be pleasantly surprised what you end up getting. You'll also get information. Sometimes it'll tell you information about, like in the case of routers, sometimes you'll actually get network information based on the boot up sequence. Hit enter to continue. Okay, I hit enter. BusyBox, which is BusyBox is a Linux package for, you'll see it a lot in IoT and embedded devices. But if you look at that, I do echo user, I'm root. I've got shell on the device. I didn't do any didn't do any software hacking whatsoever. I just went through the hardware. I now have complete control on the device. Overall, the process took me, including the soldering, about 10 minutes. That's with soldering and opening up the case and taking it apart. So you can see why this is a really good thing to know how to do. The other thing I want to say about this is if you want to get a device just for the purposes of messing with it, I would go for a router. There's a very large community of people that do custom firmwares on routers. So you can find a lot of hardware information because of that. The thing is, a lot of them are doing over-the-air updates, but there are occasionally people that do JTAG stuff with them. And so, depending on what it is, if you're wanting to get into JTAGs, you can look up their forums of these, and they'll actually tell you where all the pin assignments are and everything. You don't have to actually do any work other than confirming that what random people on the internet's telling you is correct. I mean, I wouldn't just assume that, oh, that doesn't say power. On the internet, everybody's telling the truth. Now, about the rest of this here, we're going to go and touch upon JTAG here. Now, JTAG, like UART, is not a protocol in and of itself. It's named after a trade group called the Joint Test Action Group. They're not superheroes. They're not going to come to your house and beat you up if you're doing bad things. JTAGs are a lot more cool than UARTs. However, they are a lot more work, and you can't just use a multimeter to find the appropriate ports. You're going to have to actually use a device to do it. The really, really awesome things about JTAGs is that you can do stuff like you can write to the memory. You can inspect the memory. You can dump the info to IDA. I mean, I'm sure, you all are starting to see where this has the, capabilities of doing some really, really awesome things. Additionally, though, since you can do awesome things, you're going to want to be very careful about what you do. Surprisingly enough, all these really awesome security breaking features weren't meant to be there initially. They were stapled on after the fact because I guess a vendor decided that they wanted to have, easily exploit, cross-organizational remote administration capabilities. But you can, if you're going to want to do something like dumping firmware or modifying firmware, JTAG or SPIs are usually the way you're going to want to go on that. So, how do we break it? This, unfortunately, is a bit more complex than UART stuff. I would recommend, though, if you want to start out with UARTs. Again, like, if you follow those instructions, you should be able to get a result. Depending on the device, you can get shell and, you've won. So on this, though, you're going to want an FTDI or a dongle programmer or jumper wires to a Raspberry Pi. Bus Pirates would be what I would recommend. If somebody said, hey, I don't know what I need to get, I would say a Bus Pirate. Bus Pirates do communications with a lot of devices. They'll also do SPI and I2C if you start messing with that. There are expensive tools that will do things like dump firmware significantly faster, like Shikaras. And some other specialized hardware. They start getting a lot more expensive, though. Bus Pirates are usually around like $35. Now, if the chips are not running at 3.3, you might have to do some level, some level shifting there. The really, really awesome thing is if they have both connectors, like the picture I showed you, you can connect to both at the same time. And so, if you're doing something, this is really useful because a lot of devices, if you're doing really weird JTAG stuff, you can set the devices you'll make the device reset. If you have a UART plugged in, you can watch the monitor and see what's going on while you're doing the work in real time. So you can see if you're tripping resets on the device or anything like that. Additionally, since you can set breakpoints, you can, see what you're doing. You get instant feedback. It's awesome. In terms of identifying which JTAG pin is which, there are card-like devices. They're basically they look very similar to like some of your Raspberry Pi type stuff. But there's a JTAG GNOME, which we'll go through an Arduino, and then a JTAGulator. Again, if you're using an Arduino to connect to this stuff, you want to make sure that it's the same level as the device, since a lot of Arduinos are 5 and a lot of your logical circuits are 3.3. Honestly, though, the easiest way is, in a lot of cases, you can find documentation if you look around that will tell you what the ports are. Unfortunately, since JTAG is not a standard, sometimes there'll be 12 ports, sometimes there'll be 20. It's really random, and it's just different vendors do different things. Different vendors do different things based on the devices. I was going to do JTAG enumeration on that modem for this, just in case we had enough time, but the JTAG on that they actually managed to mitigate hardware attacks on the JTAG. They did that by not including any of the chips to make the JTAG work, which is a really weird design choice based on that manufacturer. I'm not really sure why they put a port there in the first place. It's a dead port. What it should connect to is not on the board. If you surface mount the appropriate chips on there, though, it works. So they put a working channel, but no actual hardware for it to connect to, which is strange. I don't know why they bothered in the first place. I'm assuming that they must reuse the boards for like maybe other products, and that the other products have the chips. Because it just seems weird since it would cost more to put a channel on there, and the channels, it's not connected to anywhere. It's bizarre. Now on SPIs can also do a lot of really, really awesome stuff. It starts getting outside of the scope of what you'd want to talk to for an intro talk. You can use a Bus Pirate to communicate with SPIs. Additionally, instead of soldering, they make a thing called an SOIC pin. It looks like an alligator clamp, and you basically just stick it on the parts. Finding the proper ports on SPI chips is really, really easy, because if you look at the chip, there's usually the manufacturer name and the number on it, and then you can look for a data sheet, like that. So like the router in question I used for the demo, this is the data sheet for that. There's going to be a dot on a lot of them when it's just a chip, tell you which one's pin 1, but it tells us what all the pins are. Since that's from the manufacturer itself, it's probably accurate. But again, it's also showing, they have a similar thing at JTAG where it's not really a standardized process. So, I mean, as you can tell, those are all versions of the same chip. Now, I2C is the first thing out of all this that actually is a honest to good protocol. Everything else is sort of a de facto one. The cool thing about I2C is that you can have multiple devices speak on the same bus, and you can have multiple identical devices speak on the same bus. This doesn't really have a lot of security considerations. The only thing I can really think of is that you can actually transmit through I2C, like off the board itself. It's extremely slow, though. And you can use bus pirates to communicate with these. They do also make USB to I2C adapters. So you can find the port on the board and just solder an adapter in and remove it when you're done. So anyhow, I've gone 25 minutes exactly here, so I'm really glad that I had time to share all this with you. Here's my contact information again. Unfortunately, I don't really have any time for questions, but I'll hang out in the hall for a few minutes if you have anything you want to ask me. And again, I do try to be, reachable. So I really appreciate everyone showing up this morning. I know it probably wasn't easy based on last night. So thank you very much, everybody.